2 years ago, our guest today was accused by the U.S. Justice Department of espionage. The Air Force veteran and longtime senior executive at the National Security Agency was accused of giving classified documents to a news reporter. Thomas Drake faced 35 years in prison. A year later, on the eve of his trial, the government dropped all felony charges against Mr. Drake. He has since been honored as a whistleblower who helped to expose waste and fraud at the spy agency and to bring to light its massive effort to spy on Americans' own citizens. Mr. Drake's ordeal began coincidentally on September 11, 2001, which happened to be his first day as a full-time employee of the NSA. Like all other U.S. intelligence agencies, the NSA had missed key pieces of information that might have tipped off the government that the terrorist attacks were imminent. Shortly after 9/11, Mr. Drake came to believe that the agency could have predicted the attacks if it had made use of a surveillance system known as thin thread that could sift through massive amounts of data and detect patterns and key information. Instead, NSA leaders turned to outside contractor SAIC to build a new data collection system called Trailblazer that cost more than $1 billion, 10 times the cost of thin thread. At the same time, Mr. Drake learned that the agency was turning its surveillance capabilities on American citizens, which he believed was a violation of the U.S. Constitution. He decided to speak up. Mr. Drake reported his concerns about money wasted on Trailblazer and about domestic surveillance to Congress and to the Defense Department's Inspector General. He became a material witness in 2 9/11 congressional investigations. Even after the Inspector General found that the Trailblazer project was a massive waste and the program was killed, little changed at the NSA. Mr. Drake then decided to go public. He brought his information about the problems with Trailblazer to a Baltimore Sun reporter who wrote a series of articles exposing the waste. Mr. Drake insists he did not reveal any classified information. Yet, when the New York Times in 2005 reported the stunning news that the U.S. government was tapping into its citizens' telephone calls with no warrants, Mr. Drake became a target in one of the most aggressive leak investigations in history. Agents raided his home in 2007, took his computers and files, and threatened that he could spend the rest of his life in prison. In 2010, the Justice Department indicted Mr. Drake for, quote, willful retention of classified documents. It was only the 4th time in history that a citizen was charged with espionage for mishandling documents. A conviction could have had a chilling effect on whistleblowers and on journalists who often receive and keep defense documents. Morton Halperin of the Open Society Institute said Mr. Drake's prosecution, quote, poses a grave threat to the mechanism by which we learn what the government does. Instead, the government's case fell apart when the government found no evidence that Mr. Drake willfully leaked classified information. Mr. Drake's sentencing judge said the prosecution was, quote, not proper. It does not pass the smell test. Thomas Drake now writes, speaks, and teaches about whistleblowing, constitutional rights, and abuse of government power. He's the recipient of the 2011 Ridenour Truth-Telling Prize and the 2011 Sam Adams Associates Integrity and Excellence Award. As we wrap up Sunshine Week here at the National Press Club, please help me give a warm welcome to Thomas Drake.
I'd like to thank the National Press Club for inviting me here. I'm looking forward to the Q&A, so I do have a few remarks to kind of set the tone and the tenor and just reflect quite in a sobering manner on what happened to me and what's at stake for this country. I've entitled my remarks, In the Shadowlands of the Secrecy State, Preying on the First Amendment. I first want to announce, however, that I can neither confirm nor deny that a solar eclipse cast by the shadow government is at least partially blocking the view of Sunshine Week. To do either might just reveal state secrets to reporters and journalists, including those of you in the room, unauthorized to receive them. And I would not want you all to end up with allegedly classified information regarding the weather in Washington, D.C. The White House blog on Wednesday said, quote, we celebrate Sunshine Week, an appropriate time to discuss the importance of open government and freedom of information, including a quote from President Obama saying, quote, openness will strengthen our democracy and promote efficiency and effectiveness in government. Really? Jocelyn Radak, the National Security and Human Rights Director at the Government Accountability Project, remarked on Twitter just yesterday that after, quote, 3 years of shouting into the wilderness, unquote, she is relieved to see that the Kool-Aid crowd is finally realizing that the Obama administration's draconian orgy of secrecy is finally reaching a boiling point. Glenn Greenwald with the Guardian newspaper published a very powerful article yesterday titled, quote, Obama's secrecy fixation causing Sunshine Week implosion. I'd like to remind everybody that President John F. Kennedy said that the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. I like to think that we have reached a critical event horizon. And whether national security as a new state religion will further suck the dwindling light of the First Amendment into the black hole of classification and secrecy hidden from public view. It seems that secrecy is actually strengthening the national security state in order to hide from accountability and oversight at the expense of informed public interest, where it matters the most. What is the price of keeping the public in the dark and having a government increasingly operating in the dark through secret law or interpretations in secret of existing law? After all, this very event is part of Sunshine Week. And I would like to highlight just one event that brings the message of Sunshine Week home regarding what's so at stake and our increasingly two-faced government. The House Oversight and Government Reform Committee held hearings this week on addressing transparency in the federal bureaucracy, moving toward a more open government. The larger theme of the testimony before that committee centered on the inherent tension between the president's pledge for a new era of unprecedented openness and a record of invoking threats to national security to keep the public in the dark time and time again. The written testimony, and here I give a shout out to the Project on Government Oversight and their Pogo blog, states, quote, there seems to be two Obama administrations, two American governments really. One looks like a democracy in which an open government accountable to the people is an ideal and a priority. And the other is a national security state where claims of national security often trump democratic principles such as the people's right to know, civil liberties, freedom of speech, and whistleblower protections. Of course, this is not an approach exclusive to this president, but the unchecked secrecy of Obama's national security state is at cross purposes with many of his administration's openness objectives, and it raises doubts about the president's commitments and declarations about transparency, unquote. So given where we are today at the National Press Club, it seems to me that it's more than appropriate for us to discuss the long shadow of government secrecy obscuring the view of democracy in our constitutional republic, or what's left of it. Threats to the First Amendment by the government is bullseye centered on a free and unfettered press designed to suppress and repress speech and political expression in America, create fear through unilateral authority and privilege over what is fit or unfit for the First Amendment. If speech becomes the instrument of crime when revealing government crime and wrongdoing, we are under arbitrary authoritarian rule and not the rule of law. In our post 9/11 world, the government is increasingly in the first un-amendment business, engaged in a direct assault on free speech and the very foundation of our democracy, because our very individual freedoms have now become fair game for the secrecy regime.